The Cadillac Escalade stopped in front of Liberty Bistro. Its engine purred quietly as the back door opened. Karoline Leavitt stepped out first, heels clicking against the pavement. Her eyes stayed on her phone, scanning unread emails. She looked tired but sharp, like someone used to firestorms, both political and personal. Nicholas Riccio followed. His sleeves were rolled just above his wrist, watch glinting under the city lights. His hand rested gently on Karoline's back as they entered the restaurant. "Tonight's just for us," he whispered. "No news, no politics." Karoline nodded. "I hope so," she said, though her eyes still flickered with tension. She had spent the whole week at the White House, podium-defending decisions most of the country didn't understand, and some outright hated. Liberty Bistro had been their quiet place. Tucked away on a Manhattan side street, it was where they came to breathe. The staff knew them by name. The ribeye was Nicholas's favorite, and for once the wine list didn't come with questions about polling numbers. The air inside was warm and fragrant. Garlic, fresh basil, a hint of wood-fired crust. Light jazz played softly. For a moment, it felt safe. Then Ethan Caldwell appeared. He walked from behind the bar like he'd been waiting. Neat gray suit, polished shoes. His face was familiar, once friendly, now unreadable. He was about 40, the kind of man who always smiled in public but wrote angry threads online at midnight. "Mrs. Leavitt, Mr. Riccio," he said with a stiff nod. "I'm sorry, but we can't serve you tonight." Karoline blinked. "Excuse me?" Ethan's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "There's been backlash. After your recent comments on immigration and DEI initiatives, we've had complaints. Groups have said they'll boycott us. I can't put the business at risk." "You're serious?" she said slowly. Her voice was calm, but the steel in it was rising. Nicholas took a half step forward. "Ethan, we've been coming here for 5 years. We held our engagement dinner here. We've never caused trouble. What is this really about?" Ethan shifted, uncomfortably. "It's not personal. It feels personal," Karoline cut in. "I'm not here as press secretary. I'm here as a customer, a regular one. But you'd rather side with online outrage than with your loyal guests?" She reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved fast. "You want backlash? I'll show the country what your inclusion really looks like." "Karoline," Nicholas said firmly. He touched her arm. "Let it go. Not here. Not now." She stopped typing. Her chest rose and fell, tight with frustration. "Let's walk," he said. "But this isn't over." Ethan didn't speak again. He simply nodded once and stepped back, hands folded in front of him. Karoline and Nicholas turned toward the door. The soft clink of cutlery and glasses behind them felt distant, like a scene from a different world. Outside, the wind had picked up. Karoline pulled her coat tight. She didn't speak until they were halfway down the block. Do you know how many media outlets would love that clip? His face. His words. "I could burn this place down," figuratively. "I know," Nicholas said, "but that's what they want. They want you angry. They want a headline they can twist. Let's be smarter than that." They kept walking. The street was quiet for a Friday night. A couple passed by with a stroller. Somewhere nearby, a saxophone played under the subway rumble. Then, everything changed. A low boom echoed behind them. They turned just in time to see a cloud of smoke shoot from the Liberty Bistro's windows. The sound came next, sharp, terrifying. Glass shattered outward. Flames curled out from the corner kitchen. People screamed. Sirens howled. The earth beneath their feet vibrated as if something massive had shifted. Nicholas pulled Karoline back, shielding her as debris scattered across the street. A car alarm wailed from 2 blocks down. The bistro, the place that had just refused to serve them, was now collapsing in fire and rubble. Karolina stared, frozen. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Nicholas gripped her hand tightly. "Are you okay?" She nodded slowly, but her eyes stayed locked on the flames. The restaurant that rejected her 7 minutes ago was now gone. And the world was about to ask, was it just coincidence, or something far more dangerous? Let me know when you're ready for part 2, where the investigation begins and the media frenzy explodes. Smoke twisted into the Manhattan sky like a warning. Karoline stood frozen. Her hand trembled inside Nicholas's. The explosion's heat still touched her cheeks. Behind them, what was once Liberty Bistro now looked like a war zone. Flames, licking the air, pieces of brick and glass spread across the street like confetti after a funeral. Within minutes, emergency crews arrived. Flashing red lights bathed the street in chaos. Police pushed bystanders back. Firefighters shouted commands into radios. The sound of sirens, once distant, now seemed to pour from every direction. An officer approached Karoline and Nicholas. "Were you inside?" "No," Nicholas answered, his voice calm but low. "We were turned away about 10 minutes ago." The officer paused. "Turned away?" Karoline nodded. "The manager said we weren't welcome because of who I am." The officer raised an eyebrow. "And who are you, ma'am?" "Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary." The officer stiffened. "Right, I'll make sure your statement gets to the right people. Please wait here. Don't leave the scene." A fireball burst from a broken gas line, and a second wave of panic spread among the crowd. News vans were already rolling up. Microphones, lights. Reporters speaking live, voices sharpened with urgency. The headline practically wrote itself. White House official refused service. Restaurant explodes minutes later. A CNN reporter, hair windswept and eyes wide, was the first to reach them. "Ms. Leavitt, what just happened here? Were you inside? Are you okay?" Karoline didn't flinch. "My husband and I were here for dinner. We were denied entry. 7 minutes later, the restaurant exploded." "Do you believe this was an attack targeting you?" the reporter pressed. Karoline took a breath, steadying her voice. "That's not for me to decide. That's for investigators. But I will say this. Our country is becoming a place where people fear expressing views, where even public servants are rejected for who they work for. Tonight, it almost cost lives." Nicholas stood beside her silently, his hand never leaving hers. Across the street, 2 stretchers were being loaded into ambulances. Glass shimmered on the pavement. Somewhere in the background, a child cried. Another journalist shouted from behind the barrier. "Do you think this is politically motivated? Retaliation for your administration's stance on immigration?" Karoline narrowed her eyes. "Ask yourself, what kind of nation lets social media outrage decide who eats dinner? And what kind of consequence follows when hatred spreads unchecked?" Before more questions could fly, a federal agent approached. "Ms. Leavitt, we need to move you. You're considered a protected person." "I'm not running," Karoline said. "You're not running," Nicholas added. "You're cooperating. That's different." The agent guided them toward a black SUV waiting at the curb. Inside, the silence felt heavier than the smoke outside. Karoline leaned back against the seat. "This isn't just an accident, is it?" Nicholas looked at her, face unreadable. "No, it isn't." She turned toward him. "Then who would want this? To make it look like a coincidence but time it perfectly? Who knew we were going there tonight?" Nicholas stayed quiet. Then, "Too many people. Your schedule leaks every week. Your posts, my team, your staff, security detail, the media. Anyone watching closely enough." She looked down at her phone. Social media had already exploded. Dus Karoline Leavitt, Dus Liberty Bistro, and Die Backlash were trending. Dozens of theories spun across platforms. Far-right revenge, left-wing setup, foreign sabotage. An incoming call buzzed on her screen. Unknown, encrypted line. She hesitated, then answered. A male voice spoke slowly, low and clear. You just stepped into something much deeper than press conferences, Ms. Leavitt. She froze. Who is this? The voice didn't respond directly. Look inside the envelope your husband keeps, in the locked drawer of his desk. He'll know which one. Then decide if this was really about a restaurant or something bigger. The call ended. Nicholas glanced over. What was that? She looked at him. Something that says you've been keeping secrets. He didn't answer immediately. The look in his eyes said enough. She stared out the window as the SUV sped past fire trucks and journalists. What had begun as a quiet dinner had now set fire to something far larger, and she could feel it. The real war was just beginning. Karoline sat in silence beside Nicholas as the SUV rolled through the city. The city lights flashed across her face, but her eyes didn't move. Her thoughts were racing too fast. You knew something, she finally said. That caller mentioned a drawer in your office, an envelope. What is it? Nicholas's jaw tightened. He didn't look at her. Not here. Then where? He gave a short nod to the agent driving. Take us home. Secure line. No stops. The driver didn't ask questions. Within 15 minutes, they pulled into their private garage under tight security. Federal agents stood at every corner, some scanning rooftops, others near the entrance. The explosion had changed everything. Once inside their penthouse, Nicholas walked straight to his office without removing his coat. Karoline followed. He opened a drawer behind his desk and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. It was old, yellowed at the edges, the seal broken and resealed with clear tape. He placed it on the table between them. Karoline stared at it. What is it? She asked again. Nicholas finally sat down. A file I was given 8 years ago, from someone inside DHS, before we were even married. She slowly opened it. Inside were copies of emails, financial transfers, and intelligence memos. All stamped confidential. Some had names she recognized, senior officials, foreign donors, and one name that made her stop breathing for a second. Ethan Caldwell. She looked up, stunned. The restaurant manager? Nicholas nodded. Before he was running Liberty Bistro, he worked for a nonprofit based in D.C., funded through a shell company in Eastern Europe. They moved money during the 2020 protests, organized community operations. It wasn't just marches. It was coordinated pressure. Karoline turned the page. This one says he was on a soft operations team linked to civil disruption groups. Nicholas leaned forward. And now, he runs a bistro next to where half the city's elite eat? Her voice dropped. And we walked right into it. Nicholas's phone buzzed. A message from an old contact in Homeland Security. Multiple surveillance flags on Caldwell. You need to move. You're being watched. Karoline's face turned, pale. They knew we were coming tonight. Nicholas nodded. They didn't want to kill us. They wanted to scare us. Or send a message. She looked back at the envelope. Then why warn me now? Why not years ago? Because now, he said, you have power. She stared at him. So this wasn't about your past. It was a setup. He looked her in the eye. It's both. Before she could respond, the power flickered. Lights dimmed, then returned. Karoline turned sharply. Did you see that? Nicholas was already at the hallway panel, pulling up the building's security feed. Several cameras were blacked out. Static. Then, a knock at the door. He grabbed a locked box from the cabinet. From inside, he pulled a small firearm, checked it quickly, and motioned for her to move to the kitchen wall panel. The knock came again. Louder. Then a voice. "Secret Service. We need to speak with Ms. Leavitt. Now." Caroline's heart pounded. "You called them?" Nicholas shook his head. "No." The screen on the security panel showed 3 men in suits. The badges looked real, but something was off. "They came too fast," she whispered. He reached for her hand. "You trust me?" She nodded. Then the third knock came, but this time it was followed by the crash of the door breaking inward. Karoline and Nicholas dove to the ground as flashlights and boots stormed in. But it wasn't the Secret Service. They wore no standard insignias. One man barked in a foreign accent. "Find the files." Gun drawn, Nicholas shouted, "Federal agents will be here in 3 minutes. You better run now if you want to avoid being buried under charges." The intruders froze, but then, in the hallway, a second crash. This time from real federal agents breaking through the service elevator. "Hands up! Federal agents!" Chaos exploded. The intruders dropped the files, trying to run, but were taken down swiftly. Within moments, the apartment was flooded with real agents, red lights from tactical gear sweeping the room. Karoline leaned against the wall, shaken but alive. One agent helped her to her feet. "Ma'am, we believe you've just been the target of a foreign-backed intelligence probe. You weren't supposed to die. You were supposed to stay silent." Karoline's eyes burned with anger. They picked the wrong target. Nicholas stood beside her. "Now we go public, with everything." And in that moment, she realized the restaurant wasn't the story. The real story was just beginning. Let me know when you're ready for part 4, where Karoline gives a live interview that exposes everything, on national television. The morning sun rose over Manhattan, but the city didn't feel calm. News helicopters buzzed above, crowding the airspace around Karoline Leavitt's building. Reporters stood outside, cameras ready, broadcasting live. Social media was already exploding with rumors. Restaurant targeted, press secretary ambushed, domestic attack or foreign interference. Inside the apartment, Karoline sat at the kitchen counter, staring at a hot mug of tea she hadn't touched. Nicholas stood by the window, arms folded, watching the skyline. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. She looked at him, her voice steady. "I've spent years answering other people's questions. Spinning, stories, protecting administrations. But now, this one is mine." The federal agents had offered to delay the press briefing. Even her chief of staff had advised silence. But Karoline refused. She had requested one platform, a live, uncut interview on national television. And she chose the one person no one expected. Miles Vieira, an anchor from IBN World News. A known critic of the Trump administration. Tough, relentless. She wanted the hard questions. Because only that would make the world listen. At 10:20 a.m. sharp, the network went live. The Chiron read, "Breaking, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt speaks after Manhattan attack." Karoline sat straight in the chair, backlit, by the Capitol skyline projected behind her. No press team, no advisors, just her, a microphone, and the truth. Miles Vieira leaned in. "Ms. Leavitt, last night you and your husband were removed from a Manhattan restaurant. 7 minutes later, the building exploded. What happened?" Karoline paused. "The attack wasn't random," she began. "It was a warning, not just to me, but to anyone who refuses to stay quiet." Miles narrowed his eyes. "Who warned you?" She placed the sealed envelope on the table between them. "This file contains evidence linking a network of shell companies, political action, groups, and foreign agents. One of those agents was the restaurant manager who denied us entry." Miles raised an eyebrow. That's a serious accusation. Karoline nodded. It is. But not an accusation, a confession by history. These documents were passed to my husband 8 years ago by a whistleblower inside DHS. They reveal covert funding tied to disruption campaigns across the U.S., most of it disguised as nonprofit activism. She opened the file, page after page. The camera zoomed in on emails, bank transfers, and a list of names, some shockingly familiar to political insiders. Miles tapped his pen. So why wait until now? Karoline looked into the camera. Because I didn't know until last night, and once I did, I had a choice. Bury it to protect my career, or expose it and risk everything. He pressed her again. Are you saying members of the U.S. government knew about this? She hesitated. Some of them helped fund it, she said finally. Unknowingly, perhaps, but some knew exactly what they were doing. There was a moment of stillness. The newsroom behind the glass froze. Miles leaned forward, more serious now. Do you believe this attack was connected to a foreign intelligence operation? She nodded. Yes. Russian-linked intermediaries used community groups to launder both money and influence. The restaurant manager, Ethan Caldwell, was flagged in a federal probe, yet nothing was done. Until last night. Miles turned to the camera. You're watching history unfold. The White House press secretary has just accused a former restaurant manager of being tied to a foreign-backed operation inside the U.S. and claims she possesses proof. Karoline stood up slowly. This is no longer about politics. This is about truth. We've crossed a line where silence becomes complicity. Back in the control room, producers were scrambling. Phones ringing. News networks cutting in mid-broadcast to report what Karoline had just revealed. Across the country, on breakfast tables and office screens, Americans watched. Some in shock, some in fury. All eyes were now on the Capitol, and inside a quiet office deep in Washington, D.C., 2 senior intelligence officials watched the interview with grim faces. One of them leaned in and said, "She wasn't supposed to talk." The other answered, "Then we make sure she doesn't talk again." Back at the studio, Miles asked his final question. What happens next? Karoline stared into the lens, calm and clear. What happens next is war. Not with bombs, but with secrets. And I'm done keeping them. And with that, the interview ended. But the real storm was only beginning. The corridors of Capitol Hill were quieter than usual, but the silence wasn't comforting. It was tense, almost surgical. Karoline walked with measured steps, flanked by 2 federal escorts. No words were exchanged. Only the rhythmic echo of heels on polished floors, a cold reminder that she wasn't walking into a press conference. She was walking into an ambush. The doors to room 114 opened slowly. Inside sat 7 members of the Classified Oversight Committee, a mix of Democrats, Republicans, and 1 independent with a hawk-like stare. Each had a sealed folder in front of them. No cameras, no press, no public. Just power and judgment. At the head of the table sat Chairwoman Evelyn Cordell, a seasoned figure with a reputation for crushing witnesses with her words. Her hands were clasped, expression unreadable. "Ms. Leavitt," she began, "you've made quite a storm." Karoline didn't sit immediately. She looked around the room. "Are we here to investigate the explosion or silence me for speaking about it?" Cordell didn't flinch. "We're here to assess the national security risks of what you revealed on live television." Karoline sat, keeping her back straight. "Then let's talk about risk." Before anyone could respond, the door behind her opened again. Karoline turned. A man stepped inside, a familiar face from another life. Thomas Varelli, former intelligence analyst, now a special advisor to the committee. He was once her mentor during her early communications work in national defense. He'd vanished 5 years ago after a classified scandal no one was allowed to mention. She hadn't seen him since. And now he was back, sitting across from her, not as an ally, but as an interrogator. Cordell cleared her throat. Mr. Varelli will be assisting us with technical verification of the documents you presented. Karoline's eyes didn't leave his. Technical or political? Varelli gave a dry smile. Truth is often both. For the next hour, the committee dissected every page of the file she had exposed. Varelli led the questioning, his tone sharp but controlled. How did your husband receive this material? Karoline replied, It was handed to him anonymously, 8 years ago, in a sealed envelope. At the time, he dismissed it as paranoid fiction. And yet you sat on it until now? We didn't know it was real, not until last night. Cordell leaned forward. You expect us to believe that the press secretary of the United States didn't verify explosive documents until after a restaurant exploded? Karoline's voice sharpened. That's exactly what I expect you to believe, because for once, I was just trying to have dinner. The room went quiet. Then Varelli spoke again, but softer this time. One of the names in that file is still redacted. Why? Karoline hesitated. Because they're in the room. Several heads turned. Cordell's face went pale. Varelli looked stunned, but didn't deny it. Karoline pulled a single envelope from her coat pocket. This was in the original file, handwritten, unverified until this morning. She slid it across the table. Cordell opened it. Her fingers trembled. On the paper was a list of foreign bank transfers, encrypted emails, and one line that read, EC wired funds from Pack Shell on 12/14/19. Recipient, Ethan Caldwell. Everyone froze. Cordell stood slowly. This session is adjourned, effective immediately. Karoline stood too. You said we were here for national security. Cordell didn't respond. She walked out, leaving the envelope behind. As the doors closed, Varelli remained seated. His eyes were different now. Not hard, not angry. Just weary. You've just started something you can't control, he said. Karoline replied, It was already out of control. I just turned on the lights. He leaned back. They won't let this go. Not now. I'm not asking them to. She picked up the envelope and walked out of the room, head high. Outside, Nicholas was waiting in the car. As she got in, he asked quietly, How bad? Karoline held up the envelope. We're past politics now. And as the car pulled away, a black SUV followed. No headlights, no plates, just silence. Because secrets had been named, and secrets don't die quietly. Let me know when you're ready for part 6, where the chase begins, and Karoline must choose between testifying before the world or disappearing into protection. The next morning, Washington buzzed like a hive kicked at dawn. Karoline's name trended globally, not because of another press briefing, not because of any tweet, but because an encrypted leak had appeared on an obscure international website used by whistleblowers. It contained 5 files. Each tied senior government officials to foreign lobbying networks, secret payments, and off-record meetings in Dubai, Brussels, and Istanbul. The names matched what Karoline had hinted at the day before. But the leak didn't come from her. In fact, she didn't even know about it until Nicholas shook her awake just after 5 a.m. Karoline, it's everywhere. Someone released the files. She sat up, her heart thumping. What do you mean? All of them? He nodded. Not just the finance logs, photos, names, even Cordell's shell companies. Her mind raced. We didn't publish anything. I know. Outside, a black SUV idled. Secret Service. But 2 new faces stood near the driver's side. People she didn't recognize. No insignia, no badges, just silence and earpieces. Then her encrypted phone vibrated. Unknown sender. Tell no one. They're not just watching anymore, they're moving. She stared at the message, then at Nicholas. We have to go. He looked confused. Go where? To the only person who warned us. 10 hours later, they were on the outskirts of Langley, Virginia. Not inside CIA headquarters, but in a quiet diner just down the road, known only to operatives and old intelligence hands. Waiting in the back booth was Thomas Varelli. He didn't look surprised to see them. You shouldn't have come, he said as they sat. Karoline leaned forward. You leaked the files, didn't you? Varelli didn't answer immediately. He stirred his coffee slowly. I leaked a version, not the final cut. Someone else got to it before me. Someone watching from inside. Karoline swallowed hard. Is that why Cordell ran out of the hearing yesterday? She wasn't running. She was deleting servers. Nicholas clenched his fists. This is spiraling. Who's behind all of this? Varelli finally looked up. You've been asking the wrong question. He pulled out a flash drive and slid it across the table. The better question is, why now? Why kick you out of that restaurant? Why allow an explosion 7 minutes later? Why leak these files now after 8 years of silence? Karoline stared at the drive. Because the timing isn't about you, Karoline, Varelli continued. It's about something bigger coming. Someone wanted you to trigger the storm, but they're counting on someone else to ride the wave. She felt a chill settle into her bones. Who? Varelli's voice dropped. A political reset. Global. You're just a spark. Suddenly, Nicholas's phone vibrated. One message. He read it aloud. The president wants Karoline to step down. Today. Karoline's world tipped sideways. They're scapegoating me, she whispered. Varelli stood. You either step down, or they'll ensure you don't have the chance. He slid her a burner phone. There's one journalist who can survive the story. You'll find her in Geneva. She's already halfway in. Karoline's voice cracked slightly. Is it worth it? He looked her straight in the eyes. Only if you want to finish what your father started. She froze. What do you mean? Varelli gave her a half smile. You think this is about politics. This is about legacy. He died protecting a name you just read on that file. Karoline felt her pulse in her ears. Her father had died in what she thought was a heart attack. She was 17. No autopsy. No flags. Until now. Outside, another black car pulled up. Different license plate. U.S. Diplomatic Corps. Varelli slipped away through the back. Karoline and Nicholas exchanged a long look. They didn't speak. They didn't have to, because everything had just changed, and Geneva was now their only road forward. The snow was falling softly over Geneva. Karoline Leavitt sat alone in a quiet cafe overlooking the lake, steam rising from her untouched tea. Her eyes followed the water, but her mind was locked on the encrypted flash drive Varelli had handed her. It sat on the table like a loaded weapon. Nicholas had stayed behind in the hotel, keeping their digital footprint low. But she knew staying quiet wouldn't save them now. The world had already started asking the hard questions. Why had she been denied service? Why had the Liberty Bistro exploded minutes after? Why had the files, tied to powerful American and European officials, suddenly surfaced the day after she threatened to expose discrimination? Nothing about the past 72 hours had been random, and now Karoline was about to meet the one person who could make sense of it all. Her name was Clara DuPont, a war journalist turned investigative reporter for a global network banned in multiple countries for revealing high-level corruption. She wasn't just a reporter, she was a risk. And she walked in wearing a long black coat, eyes scanning the cafe like a field agent. "You're late," Karoline said quietly. "I had to make sure." "I wasn't being followed," Clara replied as she slid into the booth. "You're not the only target anymore." Karoline pushed the flash drive forward. "The documents, and the list of names." "There's something missing." Clara nodded. "Because the explosion wasn't just a message, it was a cover-up." Karoline sat still. Clara leaned in. Someone from the inside knew the files were about to go public. The Liberty Bistro wasn't just a restaurant. It was a hub, a meeting point for discreet transactions between diplomats, defense contractors, and political lobbyists. You were never the reason they denied you service. You were the threat because you were too close. Karoline's voice dropped. "So the manager, Ethan Caldwell, wasn't working alone," Clara said. "He got a call 1 hour before you arrived, traced to a burner in Brussels. The call lasted 14 seconds, and 7 minutes after you left, the building's gas line exploded, triggered by a remote signal, routed through 4 countries. Karoline's hands clenched into fists under the table. "Why me?" she whispered. Clara hesitated, then pulled out a faded photograph. Karoline's breath caught. Her father stood in the photo, young, serious, in military dress. Next to him stood another man, blurred by age, but wearing the same lapel pin she'd seen on the desk of Vice, President Cordell during her last White House briefing. "That man," Clara said, tapping the photo, "is why they're coming after you." Karoline looked up, stunned. "He was your father's handler, CIA, back in the 1990s, ran silent ops through Eastern Europe. Your father uncovered something during a mission that was never meant to be seen, bank accounts tied to a global influence scheme. But before he could go public, he died of a heart attack." Karoline's heart raced. "You're saying my father was murdered?" Clara nodded. "And now his daughter is getting too close to the same network." A silence stretched between them. Clara leaned closer. "But you've done what your father couldn't. You have evidence. The world is watching." Karoline picked up the flash. Drive, her fingers trembling. "If I release it," she said slowly, "governments will fall. People will die. Maybe me included." Clara didn't flinch. "Or you do nothing and they win again." Karoline looked out at the lake. The snow was heavier now, covering the world in a soft, silent blanket. She opened her purse, took out her personal satellite communicator, and connected it to Clara's device. "Go live," she said. The next hour changed everything. Karoline appeared on Clara's broadcast, calm and clear. She didn't rant, didn't accuse wildly. She simply explained what she knew, what she had seen, and what the files proved. By the time the stream ended, over 2.1 million viewers were watching across 3 continents. In Washington, phones rang, off the hook. In Brussels, 2 senior officials resigned within minutes. In Istanbul, one of the names on the file was arrested trying to flee through a private airport. And at the White House, Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt's official resignation letter was quietly submitted, followed by a sealed Justice Department request to reopen her father's death investigation. Later that night, Nicholas wrapped his arms around her as they stood on a balcony overlooking Geneva's lights. "You could have stayed silent," he said. She shook her head. That would have been the real collapse. Behind them, somewhere in the shadows, someone was already planning a response. But for now, the truth had echoed, and it had shaken more than just a restaurant. It had shaken the system, forever.